From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Scenes of ICE agents on the streets of Minneapolis dominated headlines and news footage in recent weeks. They also bring to mind concerns about immigration enforcement in Colorado, the surge in arrests we've seen since President Trump took office a year ago, and whether what happened in Minneapolis might play out here. Today, we talk to an elected official who's working to place stronger restrictions on how ICE operates in Colorado and nationally. Colorado Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse and other lawmakers are working to negotiate new rules for ICE agents. He's also the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security about guaranteeing members of Congress access to ICE detention centers. Representative Neguse spoke with us on Wednesday about the reforms he's pursuing. Colorado already saw more than 3,000 people detained last year, and it appears likely the state will be targeted for enforcement again this year. Could you talk about how your colleagues in Congress are seeking more oversight and regulation of ICE?
Well, first, I would just say, I think, as you may know, I, like many Coloradans, am a child of immigrants. My father and mother were refugees from East Africa who came to our country over 40 years ago. And by virtue of, the freedoms and the opportunities that we have in our great country, they were able to live the American dream. My family was able to live the American dream. They were able to see their son, one generation removed, serve in the United States Congress. So as a son of immigrants, as a son of, naturalized citizens, as a father of young children, watching the lawlessness that this administration has engaged in against American citizens in Minneapolis and in communities across the country, including here in Colorado, it is outrageous what the Department of Homeland Security is doing in terms of violating and subverting federal law and then, proposing as a reform, or rather resisting, I suppose, as a reform, adhering to federal law. A great example of this, or two salient examples, would be warrant requirements. We have the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution for a reason. It is outrageous that the agency apparently has promulgated secret policies surreptitiously internally at ICE, purporting to have wide authority to engage in broader arrests and intrusions into homes without warrants. It is outrageous that the department is subverting federal law with respect to congressional oversight at detention facilities, which, as you may know, ultimately was the genesis of my lawsuit that I initiated against ICE as a plaintiff. So anyway, I would just simply say there are plethora of reforms that I think that ultimately have to be implemented, and I'm going to continue to oppose, funding the kind of laws that we've seen.
Lawmakers are negotiating new regulations, to your point, for ICE agents, such as requiring that agents start to wear body cameras and stop wearing face masks. Realistically, with Republicans in control of Congress, what do you think we can expect to see in terms of ICE changing how it operates?
Well, I don't know that I would speak to, what may ultimately happen, right? It's an open question. We'll
True.
have what materializes over the next 9 days. I would simply say that both of those changes, those reforms that you mentioned, which I certainly support, are insufficient, again, in light of the moment that we are facing right now. And in light of what we see in communities across the country, insufficient in my view. But in any event, I probably would refrain from opining further on that until we've had an opportunity to see what comes next week.
The images out of Minneapolis in recent weeks have been stark and probably unprecedented. How much do you worry about seeing that situation replayed in Denver and Boulder?
I am very concerned about that. But I would also say that notwithstanding, the horror that I and so many Coloradans feel about what's happened in Minneapolis, make no mistake, there have been abuses and outrageous behavior and conduct on the part of the Trump administration in Colorado over the course of the last year. We saw that in Durango. We've seen that in different communities across the country, including communities that I have the privilege of representing. And so, yes, while I am certainly concerned about any kind of surge, akin to what unfolded in Minneapolis. I also think we have an obligation today to do everything we can to hold the agency accountable right now in the present, given the abuses that we learn about just in real time, including, as I mentioned, the death cards in Eagle County, a community that I represent. We just yesterday, myself and Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett demanded an investigation by the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security with respect to that particular example. And the record is replete with many, many similar examples.
And just for people who aren't familiar, you did join Colorado Senator John Hickenlooper to condemn these reports of ICE agents leaving these specially printed Ace of Spades cards behind in cars after taking people into custody. In your words, what concerns you about those cards, and what would you like to see happen here?
Well, everything. It is clearly meant to create intimidation and fear amongst immigrants in our community and amongst, more broadly, people of color in our communities, African Americans and Hispanic Americans and all Americans, ultimately. It is outrageous, and I expect accountability. And that's, again, in the long list, as you could imagine, of the various ways in which I believe this agency needs to be held accountable. This is certainly part and parcel to that. At the end of the day, I would say accountability begins at the top. It's one of the many reasons why I've been pushing to begin impeachment proceedings against Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, and will continue to push for my colleagues to take that up.
Mm. What role should immigration enforcement play in American society, in your view?
Well, again, I guess my view would be that America at its best, and I say this as someone whom is a son of immigrants, as I mentioned, I think we are at our best when we have an immigration policy that is humane, that respects the dignity, the fundamental dignity of every human being. And the way in which this administration is enforcing immigration policies is far from that. And it is just cruel and I think inconsistent with our core values as Americans. So I've long been a proponent of comprehensive immigration reform and reforming what I see and what I think most Americans see as a fundamentally broken system, and have a much longer conversation about what that might entail. But at its most fundamental, basic level, I think the vast majority of Americans are united on a core principle, which is that the chaos and the lawlessness and the abuses that you see on your television screen from Minneapolis and elsewhere, that those are not in the best interests of our country. They don't reflect who we are as Americans, and that ultimately needs to stop.
It's Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse of Colorado talking about some potential reforms for ICE and immigration enforcement. That conversation was the second half of my interview with him. In Thursday's episode of In The NoCo, we spoke about efforts to prevent the dismantling of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. You can find a link to that interview in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.